the vocation director is a very key person in all of this. He's got to have a charismatic personality, and he's got to be a real type A kind of personality, someone that just lives, eats, and breathes vocations, and he works. But also someone that doesn't get overwhelmed, who's able to kind of prioritize, this is what needs to be done, these 5 things is what I'm going to accomplish this week, and is able to do that. So that person is very important, picking the right vocation director. And then secondly, the bishop, I think it's very important that he's, stand behind his vocation director in the sense of his schedule. So if the vocation director is going to have an Operation Andrew dinner, or he's going to have a visit of a high school, or he's going to have a vocation retreat, I think a lot of bishops don't realize just how powerful their presence is to a young 16-year-old boy. I mean, we're doing this vocation retreat here in Shreveport right now, and just the bishop sitting at lunch and eating lunch and chatting with the guys. This is a tremendous honor for these guys. They're here discerning priesthood, and their spiritual father cares enough about them to be here and to eat lunch with them and to say Mass for them. And he can't stay for everything on the retreat, but he's here. And I think that makes a real impression in young people's. My bishop, I remember when I was in 8th grade, and he came for confirmation, and I was serving the Mass, and one of the things he did is he used to love to do this. He would hand you the crozier, and he would say, "Hold that for me," and then he would say, "Get used to it," like as if to say, "You're going to be a priest, or you might be a bishop," or something like that, And of course, everybody would laugh and tease you, but a young boy doesn't forget things like that,
And perhaps the most important thing for the Diocese of Bismarck. Now, this is all about the bishop, of course, and it depends on what kind of system and structure you have in your diocese. But for the Diocese of Bismarck, the single most important factor in this whole work is that our Catholic high schools are converted. They're converted. And there's this beautiful environment of Catholic faith and Catholic identity in the schools. There's a Catholic culture in the school. And God bless our dear Bishop Zipfel. He has generously devoted all kinds of resources to these schools. Primarily, he basically appoints a priest full-time, basically full-time. 75%. They live at a parish and they're parochial vicars. But they teach, so like junior or senior religion. So they teach a full year of religion to all the kids of 1 grade, in some cases 2. And they're also the chaplain of the school. And there's no better way to promote the Catholic priesthood than that. To have a young, effective, happy young priest teaching these Catholic high schoolers. And so these young men sit in this classroom 5 days a week, and they get to know this priest in a much different way than they do from the pulpit on Sunday. And they say, wow, he's a lot like me. And he's a man, and he's happy. And that's really what's happening here. As I said, 2 out of 3 are from our Catholic high schools. The bishop gratefully allows me, because I'm the vocation, to be on the personnel board. So when those decisions are made, which a priest is assigned to where, he has allowed me to be a part of that. And so I get to have some influence there where, well, Bishop, I think this priest would be effective in the Catholic high school here. And I believe it would result in many young men entering seminary formation.
Like any bishop, this archbishop, I believe, has made it a priority, vocations work. It's really one of his priorities, in addition to education.
They do. Each of our high schools in the city have a full-time priest. Okay. In the rural parts of our diocese, one is a pastor and a part-time chaplain, and in the other one he's an associate, and he teaches they're different models, but they all have a chaplain or a priest that they come into contact with every day. But something that is also so great about Bishop Jacels is that he is intimately involved in our seminarians' lives, not only in conversations with me, but he recognizes their parents when he sees them out in parishes. Each year, we gather together as the parents of seminarians and the bishop, so that we can have an evening of fellowship together, so that we can get to know the parents better and the parents can get to know myself as the director of vocations and Bishop Jacels better. Every evening during the summer, our seminarians come to Wichita, no matter where they are in the diocese, whether they're teaching totus tuus or mowing lawns in Zenda or Pittsburgh, Kansas. They come together to our Spiritual Life Center for an evening of formation. When Bishop Jacels is able to be there, he is there, so that he is standing there right by their side, laughing with them and getting to know them, just as he expects me to know them. This summer, he wants to open his house for evenings of fraternity after those evenings of formation, so that we can let our hair down, so to speak, and get to know each other even better by playing cards and just by sitting around and relaxing together. Bishop Jacels also makes it a priority in his life to visit the seminaries where we send our seminarians at least once a year, not only to encourage our seminarians, but to hear feedback from faculty members and to meet with them individually one-on-one, so that when they're ready for ordination and when he's ready to ordain them, he truly knows them.
Well, the bishops usually send them to us. We have priests.
Everybody had said.
No, most of the time. Most of the time they don't want substandard candidates.
Okay.
So they send us guys that they think will be okay. And, they're not perfect. I take a look at a candidate and say he's 6 years away from ordination. What can I work with this guy?
Yeah.
Will he accept criticism? Will he let us form him? Will he be cooperative? Is he joyful? Can he laugh? I always look for a sense of humor. Nothing brings people down than a sour priest. So a priest has to be able to laugh. And you also have to take care of your young clergy. You have to do things, the bishop has to really take care of his young clergy. He has to meet with them maybe once a month or every quarter at the least. He has to come to their days when they have recreation days. They have to do things as a group because that energizes them and keeps them going, because they're pumped about vocations and about the fraternity, the priesthood, and if they go out and become isolated individuals in parish, we just will replicate the sad state we were in the 60s and the 70s.
When Bishop Flynn came to Lafayette as bishop, he instituted a whole program, as it were. He had a special way of working with vocations and working to promote vocations. He had been a rector of a seminary for many years himself, and so he had a lot of experience with how people respond to vocation. He had a lot of insight and intuition as well as a lot of wisdom to be able to address himself to that vocational work. One of the things that he did many things, but one of the things that he did was to promote what were called vocation suppers. And the vocation supper was where the bishop himself issued an invitation to the pastors to bring to his house on given evenings during the year a group of men who were maybe interested, had questions. They weren't necessarily ready to make a commitment, but just had an interest in vocation to the priesthood. And so they would come to the bishop's house for dinner. It was a very simple format. The bishop would have them with the pastor, so the pastor and the interested party. They would sit at dinner. There were maybe 10 to 15 people at the table. They would have dinner, and then after dinner, they would still sit around the table, and each priest would share his story of how he felt that God had called him to the priesthood. Then, after each priest, there were maybe 5, 6, 7 priests present, they would share their story. Bishop Flynn himself would share his story. And then the young men would be asked if they had questions. And then they would be free to ask questions. The dinner with the question and answer period never lasted more than about 2 hours, 2.5 hours at the most. But it was extremely effective. And there were quite a number that signed up, as it were, and it was a fruit of that effort.
You do. You want good speakers and all, but on the other hand, sometimes you get a priest that comes in there who's maybe not the most charismatic personality, and yet he says something the Holy Spirit uses powerfully in a young man's life. And so what I would do is I would bring in the priest of a certain deanery, even if some of them maybe weren't the most charismatic, and I would still invite them to tell their vocation story, because they're the ones who are in this area with these men, you know. And then, of course, the bishop would tell his vocation story, and then he would say anything you ever wanted to ask the bishop, and the guys would ask some, their questions. You know how high school boys are. But the day would end with everybody got the message, and the Holy Spirit has a chance now. Not 5 guys, but, 300 guys have all got the message. You are invited. The bishop of this diocese and the vocation director has said, I invite you to pray about this. You could be called to become a priest. You have been invited. Now, this man will not go to the seminary because he wasn't invited.
The first bishops' meeting I went to, the very first one, they had a special presentation on vocations. And I remember 2 things. I remember a number of things from that presentation, but there were 2 things in particular which I need to mention. One of them was where there was Eucharistic devotion, there was an increase in vocations. That's a given. And I think that is absolutely true. Second thing that was said that made an impression on me was when a bishop got up at the meeting in front of all the bishops, and he said, we have to stop making excuses for promoting vocations to the priesthood. And I knew exactly what he was talking about, because in my life as a pastor, and I've been a priest for almost 34 years, I encountered that a lot in decades past, where we were hesitant to mention vocations to the priesthood because we were so conscious, and I think incorrectly so, conscious of not offending anyone. And I think this is absurd. This is absurd. And this bishop called a bluff, as we say, when he said that. And I said, he's absolutely right. Because if we had a real healthy view of vocations, we would realize that in encouraging priestly vocations, we end up encouraging all the other vocations. Whether it's vocations to the religious life, contemplative life, to marriage, and all the like. They're all complementary. They're all complementary, and they all work together. They all work together. It's not that we, don't speak about all the other vocations. It's just that, as a bishop so well said, we have to stop apologizing for promoting vocations to the priesthood. And I think he was correct. I think young people today are very much open to the call of God. I think it's a number of things. First of all, it's certainly the work of the Holy Spirit. There's no doubt in my mind. The Holy Spirit has always been working. It's just the Holy Spirit, I think, works in different ways at different ages to meet the challenges of that particular age. And in this particular age, which tends to be materialistic, which is what Pope John Paul II pointed out, as well as Pope Benedict does. In a materialistic age like this, young people are looking for spiritual values which are deeper than the superficiality that's dished out to them every day by the media and by entertainment and, even in schools and in their community.
Yeah, just coming from Bishop Matchbuff High School celebrating Mass, I see a great generation, and they need to be called to greatness. They will respond. The changes that I've seen over the years in the kids that are encouraged and taught how to pray and really given a good example, these kids step up and they want God. They want the truth. They want freedom from their sins, and they're ready.
When we're looking for candidates or recruits for the seminary, we're looking for somebody who wants to do this with their whole heart. We're looking for a man of sacrifice, a man of prayer, and a man who has zeal for the faith, and really a man who, if he could do anything else in the world, would rather choose being a priest of Jesus Christ than anything else. So, practically speaking, what are we looking for? A man that prays, a man that goes to Mass, a man that is willing to enter into a relationship of spiritual direction with a priest, a man who is a man of service in the church. Is he a lector? Is he a Eucharistic minister? Will he come to rake leaves in the fall when the parish grounds are full of leaves? Is he somebody who wants to be around the church and who loves Jesus Christ? If I find men like that, when we put them into the fertile environment of the seminaries that we send to, there's normally a lot of success.
I think that that if they show or demonstrate that they take the spiritual life seriously, that I think is important. They don't have to be, as we would say, terribly advanced in the spiritual life, although some might be, but at least that they take it seriously, that they have a personal relationship with God. They are devout. I think that's important. A second quality I would look for would be that they have a certain degree of intelligence, that they're able to, that they're a good student. They don't have to be, again, geniuses, certainly not, but they just have to be good students. They work well with their studies. They're open. They have an open mind. I would also say that if they demonstrate a common sense approach to life, they can reason things out well. They have a kind of natural sense of logic in their way of dealing with life. I think that's important. And then finally, the fourth thing I would say is that they know how to work. In other words, that they, when demands are placed upon them, they respond. When they are given responsibility, they take it and they run with it. I think those are four important qualities: the spiritual life, the intellectual life, the common sense, and then the ability to work.
Whenever I meet with a young person who's considering the call to priesthood or religious life, the first, it's basically three stages. You have the inquiry, where they're just beginning to ask questions. And as they ask those questions, I try to provide the practical answers. Now, there are some answers that require some spiritual direction, a confessor. And so that's one of the first recommendations I'll make. Find a priest that you trust who can guide you in the right ways to be a regular contact. Every 2 weeks is usually recommended. Once a month for sure, an hour with that priest discussing your interior life of prayer, which is the second thing I'll recommend. You're praying every day for at least 20 to 30 minutes with the Scriptures, with silence, and preferably with the Blessed Sacrament. And so everyday prayer and spiritual direction, which will imply the last thing, going to confession on a regular basis, seeing that conversion take shape. So those are the three things I recommend right away when we even have an inquiry. Once they've entered that, they're really into discernment. And, I'll check in once a month or every 2 or 3 months, depending. And we'll check in such a way that we might have lunch or just gather. And that discernment phase might start to lead into, I think I need to look at the seminary. So we'll visit the seminary. And the application itself is extensive enough that it really will determine where someone's at, because there's a biography someone writes about their autobiography. They kind of tell the story of their life. And there's an investment of time and energy in answering questions that will determine pretty quickly if they've reached the conviction that they need to enter seminary.
I find most success in getting young men to these retreats when I first let the pastors know that the retreat is happening and ask them to invite particular young men in their parishes. And then when I get the names of young men that have either been on retreats in the past or I have a name from a pastor, I write them an email myself and invite them personally, and I find that's the most successful thing.
We also, in addition to identifying, we want to saturate the people, those people who are in contact with young people, saturate them with the materials they need to let them know what's being offered, be it a retreat, be it a discernment event, be it some event with the Archbishop, an open house, so that they can know. And then we also have the mailing list of young people who are on the same page with others who are considering vocation, and we regularly mail those and adjust that list and keep an eye on it.
What I try to do when a young man comes into the application process for us, we have an application process that's developed so that I can walk alongside a young man and get to know him. It's a series of 4 interviews with myself or the director of formation. And in that process, we've identified priests throughout our diocese who have the qualifications to be a spiritual director for a candidate in the seminary. And I encourage the young man to enter into a spiritual direction relationship with a priest at that time. Some already come with their own spiritual director when they come across my doorstep. Some already know how to pray the Liturgy of the Hours. They already know how to pray Lectio Divina. They're praying their rosary every day. Others, it takes a little bit of encouragement to increase and develop their life of prayer, and one of the key elements that we're encouraging young men to do is to have a spiritual director, not only when they're applying for the seminary, but before the application process, and even a local spiritual director during the time when they're in seminary, so that when they're home for summer break or when they're home from Christmas break, that they have someone who helps to verify and to check that they're still doing the things that the seminary is training and forming them to do, like going to daily Mass, praying their holy hour, praying the Liturgy of the Hours. And also, God willing, when they're ordained one day, that they'll already have a priest back in the diocese with whom they're comfortable about sharing about their relationship with Jesus.
The prayer life of each of the guys that comes to one of our retreats, who comes into contact with my office, it's very important. And so that's why on our retreats we teach them to pray. Sometimes we'll offer, probably once a year, we'll offer a Lectio Divina class, how to pray with the Scriptures. We also obviously take them to adoration. We teach them how to pray during the Eucharist, during the liturgy. And we also teach them the Liturgy of the Hours, the prayer of the Church and the prayer of priests. And these are all just part of what they learn so that they can model in their own lives the prayer life and the prayer style.
I think we have to realize in the whole area of vocation work is that this is God's work, and every vocation is going to be, I always say, 99.9% God's part and 0.1% our part. And, if my percentages are right, and maybe I've overestimated our part, then prayer has to be a huge part of every vocations program. And, the word prayer in every language means to beg. And that's what Jesus said. We must beg the harvest master to provide laborers for the harvest. And so I think we have to attack it first and foremost by asking the people of God in the diocese to pray every day. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. And I think that's the first part of a successful vocation program. In our diocese, we had a diocesan prayer for vocations, and every parish said that prayer at every Mass, daily Mass and Sunday Mass. And every Catholic child in every Catholic school said that prayer every day with their morning prayers. It was written on the board. It was on posters on the wall. So the whole diocese was asking God every day to send us priests and vocations. And adoration chapels, there's an extremely high correlation between perpetual adoration chapels and vocation and dioceses that do very well with priestly vocations. Because, you place, especially if you're able to get young people to pray before the exposed Blessed Sacrament, then it's pretty obvious that the Eucharist is here because of a priest, and that Eucharist is Jesus. This is an awesome vocation. And so getting people to pray in front of the Blessed Sacrament, is understandably, gives you a high correlation with successful programs. So I think perpetual adoration chapels, prayer for vocations, many bishops I know, the first thing they do is they bring in a group of Carmelite sisters, and they say, we have to have the prayer support if we're going to be successful, not just in vocations, but in all of the work of the church. I think that this has to be number one. Some vocation directors have prayer campaigns where they ask their seminarians to visit the sick in the summer and to bring prayer cards to the sick, asking them to offer up their sufferings for priestly and religious vocations. And, people who are sick love doing this. They love being a part of this work of the church, and it gives their suffering a purpose. So I think that's the first thing I always recommend. We have to emphasize that it's mostly God's part. He can snap his fingers. When Our Lady of Guadalupe appeared in Mexico, there were 9 million conversions to the Catholic faith in 10 years. God has the power to fill every seminary and every church with all the priests we need, but we have to beg him to. And I think sometimes we don't pray for enough. We pray for an apple and God wants to give us an orchard. We have to pray courageously and boldly and say, Jesus, this is for your church. And mobilizing the forces of prayer. So that's the first thing I always say.
There are many parishes throughout the diocese that have perpetual adoration. And I'd say that's another huge thing in the Archdiocese of Denver that really assists us in getting young men for vocations to holy orders and consecrated life. One of the things that really helps, I found, we started doing this poster again after a number of years. And the poster has the pictures of all of our seminarians studying for the Archdiocese of Denver, the Archbishop, Auxiliary Bishop, and the rector of our 2 seminaries here in Denver. And this gives an image to the people of the Archdiocese of Denver of the young men that they're praying for. Then in addition to that, we have a vocations prayer calendar that we put out each year. And this calendar goes through each day of the year. There's one or a number of young men and even young women who are listed for holy orders and consecrated life, so that they can be praying for the young men and the young women from their parishes that are answering a call to serve God and to serve the church in holy orders and consecrated life. So each day throughout the year in these adoration chapels, these will typically be posted so that the people going in there can pray for these young men, these young women. And then anyone that wants a copy of this can get a copy of it. And we produce it each year. In addition to that, here in the Archdiocese of Denver in the Year for Priests, we have a very similar calendar that's put out with the name of a priest. Each day of the year, we have another priest who we're praying for, and then scattered throughout our days to pray for vocations to holy orders during this Year for Priests. And this calendar is an opportunity for the people in adoration, the people in the parishes, to pray for their priests and pray for future seminarians. In addition to that, we also have these cards, these little booklets to pray for vocations. We have them in English and in Spanish. And they're prayers for the sick and the homebound. So each year we use the Knights of Columbus to assist us in getting these prayer cards in the hands of every single sick and homebound person that's receiving communion from the parishes. And it's the people that are sick and homebound that are so valuable in praying for more vocations. The first time that I got those prayers into the hands of the sick and homebound, I turned to the Lord and asked that he slow down the number of men. Don't stop it at all, but just spread it out perhaps a little more, because the response was so fantastic. And the prayers are so powerful of those who are sick. And the Lord answers their prayers quickly and fruitfully. And so we find that that's a huge key to our success. On top of that, I would say the next step would be to get the families open to vocations to the priesthood. And the pastors once again set that tone, and the bishop again sets that tone. And so our families in our parishes do an incredible job of praying for an increase in vocations to holy orders and consecrated life, and then are very willing to offer their children in prayer to the Lord and to the church and for the church.
The other thing I know that happens, you see it through the eyes of faith, but I also see it through the statistics, is perpetual adoration. Any parish that has perpetual adoration or significant adoration, even if it's not perpetual, that parish produces vocations. Every diocese that has a lot of vocations also has a lot of perpetual adoration.
They go hand in hand.
They go hand in hand. And to try to get kids to take hours. I mean, if you put the kids in the presence of the Lord, he'll do his work. You know, it's not as if he's a slackard, but, you know, you need to get them there, and you need to get them to open up and listen to what he has to say. You know, the priests in this regard sort of function like God's secretary. You know, you arrange the meeting and you show them into the room. And then you leave, and then you debrief them later. But the boss is not you. The boss is the Lord.
Don't confuse them.
Yeah.
I grew up in an area of Nebraska where if you weren't German and Catholic, you were from out of town. And there are about 9 parishes within 20 miles, and they're all grand Gothic structures that were built with pennies from farmers. So I see, you know, in the divorce rate, I don't think anybody in my class of 50 kids in high school came from a divorced family, none of them. And so I didn't know of a divorce growing up. And nobody really had divorce as an option in that area. So the family life is critical for raising up vocations, and for that reason I've been very closely working with the Archdiocese Family Life Office. In fact, this weekend I was just at a retreat for families called Strengthening Catholic Families, and we offer them all kinds of programs to assist them in their prayer life, to make up that domestic church that's so necessary. And all of our efforts between the Catholic Family Life Office and my office, I also do a father's retreat, a father and son retreat with that office. And so we've cooperated on a number of events so that people can see that vocations don't just come out of thin air. They come from families. And being the eldest of 3 boys, it wasn't discouraged. In fact, it was a blessing, seen as a blessing in our family, that one would go and study for the priesthood. And that's often the first step that's most difficult, that somebody would go and study. What does that mean? What does that entail? What would happen if they don't go on? And so all kinds of fears get in the way, and families that are faithful are more easily able to see.
I find that there is when there is an initial resistance on the part of the parents, eventually the parents acquiesce. They give in at some point, because they realize, I mean, if they really have the interest of the child at heart, of their son at heart, then they realize that if this is what is going to make him happy, and I've heard parents say that, if this is what's going to make him happy, then we support him entirely. I've known some interesting stories in my life. I've also known parents who didn't acquiesce and continued to be obstructionist to their son's desire to respond to what he thought was the call of God to vocation. So it runs the gamut, but my experience has been that the parents eventually acquiesce, and because they have the interest of their son at heart, and they may not see it totally as a spiritual thing, spiritual reality, but they do understand at some point that God is speaking to their son intimately and truly in this call.
Well, in addition to the Catholic families, you have to have something going on at the parish level or at the diocesan level that will allow students to plug in to what it means to pray and pay attention and listen. Pope Benedict said it best when he came to the United States. You know, he addressed the vocation crisis that some perceive, and he said, if we are teaching our young people to truly pray, then we can trust that God will lead them. Sometimes we get bound up in a lot of anxiety about vocations, but if young people are praying, we can trust that God will lead them. And so the understanding that the parish is a school of prayer is something that a lot of our pastors are really learning and plugging into for years here. And so we've got a lot of parishes that are home to perpetual adoration, and those parishioners keep their holy hours, and some of the holy hours are dedicated to prayer for vocations. And so having the Vocations Office offer the materials to pray for priests, to pray for vocations in those holy hours, it really creates a natural avenue of promoting vocations, but also realizing that the first priority, the first necessity is prayer. And where a family knows how to pray and sacrifice in the parish, we'll see vocations come.
There is great fervor and love for our seminarians because there's great love for the priesthood in our diocese. People don't just love our priests, they do love our priests, but they love the Eucharist. They love the opportunity to go to confession. They love Eucharistic adoration. They love Jesus, they love their parishes. Part of that is because we've cultivated a sense of stewardship in our diocese where people engage in the Christian principle of sharing their time, talent, and treasure with everyone, not only in their parish, in their community, but also throughout the whole diocese. This sacrifice in their life, I think, opens our families to be open to God's will in their sons and daughters' lives. Not every family, but most of our families, a good portion of our families. But specifically, how would I know that other than going from parish to parish and talking to people? Each year we have an annual seminarian recognition dinner right before our ordinations. We are holding that venue in our largest parish in the diocese, the Church of the Magdalene. Last year, over 1,100 people came and paid $30 a plate to come for the chance to have an evening with our seminarians and with our priests. We had to cut off the numbers in that event because there's so much excitement around it. This year, we can't have a sit-down dinner because we don't have a venue big enough. And we anticipate the numbers will be even greater because within 3 or 4 years, this event's grown from 400 to nearly 1,100 people. And so we're going to have a stand-up reception in the largest place in our diocese that will hold these people. Last summer, we took our seminarians to a rural part of our diocese to hold a similar venue, and we had over 300 people that joined us for that evening of fellowship and prayer. There is a great fervor for our seminarians, but I think it happens because of our priest and because of our people's love for the priesthood.
Well, you know, it's kind of like when I came to Lake Charles, one of the very first things I did was institute 40-hour devotions. And I had heard other bishops who did it, and they experienced an increase in vocations. And but you know, it was good to hear that witness, but I didn't need to hear that witness to know that this was going to be effective. I mean, this is just a further endorsement of something I was already convinced of. And so we began 40-hour devotions for the specific intention of praying for priestly vocations in this diocese. We pray for all kinds of other vocations too, religious vocations and all the other vocations, but the main intention of that 40-hour devotion before the Blessed Sacrament is to pray for vocations to the priesthood in this diocese. And I think the Spirit is moving, and I think there's been a response.
Boys, when they decide what they're going to be with their life, what they're going to do and be with their life, the most they do is tell the Lord what they're going to do. Like, you know, many times they don't even think, God doesn't even enter into the equation, okay? Yeah. But if he does, you know, they'll stop into chapel someday and say, Lord, you know, I want you to know that I found my bride, I proposed to her, and we're going to get married. But they never ask the question, does God want you to get married? Does he want you to do this? Well, what if he wants you to do something else? A vocation is a call, vocare, a call to be something and to do something with your life. And you have to ask God what it is he wants you to do with your life. Because he specifically calls different people to different things. And he doesn't like, and one thing God doesn't like are timelines and hoops. So a guy will say, well, if you tell a guy, did you ask God, is this what he wants you to do? Well, no. Well, you should ask. Well, all right, but the wedding's coming up in a couple months here. I need an answer now. And so, they say, well, give me a sign. I want a sign by the end of the week. Or, I want you to speak to me, or whatever. I mean, it's giving God the bum's rush here, You have to begin to ask God what it is that he wants you to do. But before you're able to do that, we understood that a young man has to have a substantial daily prayer life that would enable him to think about this in the first place. And that's what a lot of boys didn't have, and they still don't have. And so when we designed these 3 vocation retreats, it was a twofold purpose. The first was to raise the notion of a vocation and to develop in each of these boys the skeleton of a prayer life. It's easy to tell a young man, you should have a daily prayer life, but they don't have a clue about what that means. So you have to sit down and mentor them. You have to tell them, well, these are some elements that have to be in everybody's prayer life. You need some type of morning prayer, of offering your day to God. You need some type of evening prayer. You need some type of an examination of conscience before you go to bed. And not just about the bad things you did, but what were the good things that you did today? And you thank God for that. What were the bad things you did? And you ask God's forgiveness for that. And then what were the good things that you should have done but didn't do? The sins of omission. What was that? So in a sense, you get on the scales to see, did I gain any weight today? Or did I lose any weight today? Only this is in regard to my life of virtue or sin. How did I do today? You also need to do some type of spiritual reading to get a good book. I mean, guys will be all the time reading the sports page, and that's how they keep their interest up in sports. They read about it. They think about it. They watch it. Well, you have to do the same thing in regarding the spiritual life as well. You have to give them good ideas that don't naturally occur to them. They have to take an interest in reading about the faith, lives of the saints, things like this. You have to teach them the importance of regular confession.
That is your mass retreats.
That's one of the things we do on these. We try to construct for them and show them how to build a daily prayer life that they can be faithful to in good times and in bad. And we talk to them about what in the spiritual life we call spiritual dryness, because they're not always going to feel good when they pray. I remember a young man, he was in college, telling me one time he was trying to be faithful to his prayer life, and he said, it's just, I don't get any consolation in prayer, which he meant I didn't get any good feelings when I go pray. He wanted the goosebumps. And he says, Monsignor, he said, this may come as a shock to you, but I haven't had any consolation in prayer for over 3 months. 3 months? He said, yes. He says, hope you're not shocked. I said, well, I am shocked, but not in the sense you think I am. I said, the last time I received consolation in prayer was Ronald Reagan was in his first term. And I don't know whether it was consolation or because I was a good Republican. But I said, most of the time, most people don't get consolation in prayer. They go and they pray because they need to pray. It's like breathing. They go to pray because, they owe that to God. They owe God thanks, even when they don't feel like it. Anybody can pray when they want to. It takes a person that loves God to pray when they don't want to, when they don't feel like it. And so we try to introduce these young men at each of these levels in appropriate pedagogical ways to a daily prayer life. And we constructed a booklet, a little prayer booklet we would give each kid according to his age. We would explain confession to them. We would explain the importance of weekly Mass and try to get them to go. We have what we call the TF Club, Tuesday and Friday. We try to get them to go to Mass on Tuesday and Friday, as well as Sunday, and then gradually expand that. To read something from the Scriptures, take one of the Gospels and just go through it a paragraph each day, something about the Rosary. We tried to mentor them regarding temptations regarding purity, because when they're kids like that, the jets run hot, and you have to, and that upsets them because they think, well, when I'm going through this, God can't like me. Well, you need to help them to contextualize it and pray through that, okay? So that was one of the big aims, was to get them, because if they don't have their prayer life on a daily basis, if they're not faithful to that, they're never going to think seriously about a vocation to the priesthood. And then the second thing was kind of, to each group was different. The 7th and 8th graders, at the end, we wanted them to feel good about the priesthood. So, we showed them movies that would bring out the best, some priest heroes. In those days, we had the Scarlet and the Black, with Gregory Peck, that type of film in which the priest was the hero. We had very attractive priests talk to the guys. We had seminarians who were very athletic, play with the guys, lead sports with the guys, talk to the guys. Each seminarian had a group of like 8 guys that he was their prefect for that week. And they got to know them, and they followed up and wrote them during the year, maybe every 6 or 8 weeks. And so they left feeling good about the priesthood. They may not know an awful lot about it yet, but these guys are good guys, and I had no idea that seminarians and priests could be as cool as this. Okay, they didn't use those terms. That was my words from the 50s and 60s. In the 9th and 10th grade, we wanted them to think well about the priesthood. So that group was tailored not only to their prayer life, developing their prayer life appropriately, but also to getting them to say, well, not only do I feel good about the priesthood, this is why I feel good about the priesthood. To be able to say, well, celibacy isn't what I thought it was. It's not just a negative. It's a positive thing, too, when we would try to explain that to them. And obedience was as a positive thing. And then for the juniors and the seniors and the freshmen in college, we would try to get them to say, well, all right, you feel good about the priesthood, you think well about the priesthood, now think about it regarding you. Maybe you should consider it. We try to help them analyze their gifts. One of the ways that God calls a man to the priesthood is he gives them certain gifts. And a gift given to you by God is never meant for you. It's always meant to give away. So we would try to help these guys say, well, what are the gifts that you've got? And why would God give you these? And we tried to show them that by using God's gifts the way God wants you to, you'll be happy. And that was one of the things we concentrated on with the juniors and seniors. The other kids were a little too young for it, but they always had a sneaking suspicion that they knew the church needed priests and that God might be calling them to be a priest. They could understand both of those things. The stumbling block was, bottom line is, they didn't think that they could do it, and they didn't think they would be happy doing it. Even if they could do it, they didn't think they would be happy. They thought that in the end, God was going to scam them. That in the end, they were going to get, shafted because they weren't going to be happy. It was going to be a life of duty and work and not much benefits. And that was why it was so important for them to hear and to see and to live with, just for a few days, seminarians who were happy and excited about the priesthood, and priests who were happy and excited about the priesthood, and priests who were happy praying. They needed to see these guys pray as well. And that was a very important thing. And at the end, by the time I left the vocation office in '92, we had almost 20 new priests from that program, and 3/4 of our seminarians who are still in the pipeline were from that program. And it got to the point where guys who went on Emmaus Days in the early '80s were now running it as priests in the early '90s. And so there was a
regeneration.
Right, and when these young priests were able to tell these young boys, when I was on Emmaus Days, and they were just amazed at that they were once where they were. And that, perpetuating it that way was very helpful.
Once a year we have a retreat called a Quo Vadis retreat, which is really a discernment retreat in our diocese. It started over 17 years ago. I went to the first Quo Vadis retreat, and it happened to be Monsignor Michael Jacels, who is now our bishop, who led that retreat. Currently we have nearly 50 young men that will gather from throughout our diocese to come and spend a weekend together to discern God's will in their life and to learn tools to help them to do just that. What really happens on that weekend is not only do they receive these tools about how to discern their vocation, but they see 50 other young, healthy, and holy men who are open to doing God's will, and it's a huge sign of encouragement for them in discerning their own vocation.
Do you invite all 400 or just specific people out of the 400 who all do you invite on that? How do you select? How do you select who you invite?
Our database is comprised of juniors and seniors in high school and college-age men up to the age of about 30 years old, but most of them are under the age of 23, from 17 to 23 years of age. And so for the Quo Vadis retreat, I invite seniors in high school on up to men of about 25 years of age.
Okay.
And it probably gives me a pool of about 300 invitations. Then when it comes close to time to Christmas break, I have our transitional deacons come into the chancery, and we call all of those men individually who haven't responded through Facebook or through the written invitation to see if they are willing and ready to come. It also, at that time, helps us to find those few who have been engaged over the past few months and those who really aren't interested in discerning God's will in their life at this particular moment. So,
what I personally do then, as far as recruitment efforts in this regard, is I see myself as acting as, a matchmaker, a midwife. The most important thing I can do for a young man is to get him around our seminarians in environments where he gets to see the seminarians and socialize with them. And so we have 3 events where we do that. 3 events a year where through the chaplains, through seminarians, through pastors, I get the names of guys that seem to be thinking about it, our prospective candidates. And we have 3 events each year where where the seminarians are together and I invite prospective candidates to be a part of it. The first is the pre-ordination banquet. So the night before our ordination, our priestly ordination, we have a big banquet. The Office of Vocations has a big banquet for the ordinand, for the guys getting ordained, and for their immediate families, just their immediate families, a representative or two from their seminary, and then a couple of buddies from their seminary. Then the bishop is there, I'm there, their pastor's there, and all the seminarians. And then I invite this select group of prospective candidates. We start with a holy hour, evening prayer, then we have a social hour, a happy hour, and then a big banquet. At the end of the banquet, we have toasts. I give a little fervorino spiel to everyone. And then the seminarians continue to hang out with these prospective candidates to be there and to feel part of the group and an inside. So that's been effective. And then I invite those same candidates to the ordination, and I have a reserved pew. So they're honored guests, and they get a reserved pew right behind the seminarians. Then the second event is our summer gathering, our summer outing. We have these generous people here in the diocese who have this big, beautiful cabin on Lake Sakakawea. It sleeps 21 people. And now we're outgrowing it, but they have another cabin that sleeps a few, and so we're hoping to be able to fit into both of them, that both will be able to handle. So invite, once again, all the seminarians, and then prospective candidates again. We're there 3 nights. So like a Thursday night, a Friday night, a Saturday night, a Sunday. And we arrive that first night, have a meal, keep it low, they hang out, everybody chats, whatever. We have Mass, of course, every morning. Have Holy Hour every morning right in the cabin. I expose the Blessed Eucharist in silence right in the cabin. We adore our Lord. And then we have Mass right after that, and morning prayer, so that's part of every morning. And then we do something each day. We have a golf. One day we play golf, another day we do this and that. But the point is, each evening, so the second night and the third night, each seminarian gets 10 minutes to share his story. And these prospective candidates just sit and listen as these 20 seminarians go on and describe how they came to decide to enter the seminary. I got that idea from my vocation director when I was in the seminary, Monsignor Gerald Walsh, who is a great mentor of mine and who I try to follow the example of in many cases. And that has had a profound effect on these prospective candidates. Just listening to these stories of these men, and they say, wow, what's going on in me, it went on in them. And in fact, Monsignor Walsh wrote a book, God Still Calls. He was the vocation director of the Diocese of Bismarck from 1991 to 1998, 7 years. And after he got done, he wrote a book about most all the seminarians that were in the seminary when he was vocation director. And so all of our stories are here. Each story has 2 parts, how he saw it and how we saw it. And that's the book. There's 23 guys in here. God Still Calls. And so those can be ordered. And then the third event where we invite prospective candidates is our Christmas party. I have a big Christmas party for the guys. We have a holy hour, social, big meal, banquet. Sometimes Santa shows up. Sometimes we have a choir. But we just hang out, have fun, Christmas gifts, blah, etc. And then the guys usually hang out and play some sort of card games, poker, board games, whatever. And the prospective candidates get to hang out with them. So those are the 3 events where I bring prospective candidates together with the seminarians. But all those prospective candidates have come to me through the priest chaplains or through pastors or through other seminarians' contacts.
Right now I have a vocations team that helps me and assists me in promoting and recruiting vocations and also in the application process. So I have a director of formation who helps me directly with the applicants, and also together we run groups called discernment groups, where we gather not only our applicants but other young men who are interested in giving seminary a try, or at least discerning God's will in their life. We come together once a month and we pray together and we talk about a different topic of formation or discernment during that meeting, and we end in prayer, and it gives these young men a chance to talk about their common fears and the common joys that go along with discerning whether or not they should enter seminary. I have another director of promotions who will help me with promoting vocations on the parish level, hopefully with vocations committees or vocations contacts where we can run programs like a 31 Club that's promoted by the Sarah Club, or teams that will pray for our seminarians, or others that will look for those young men that are sitting in the pews right now that are willing and ready to give seminary a try. I have another director who is the director of recruiting, and it's his job to go out at least twice a month to have one-on-one contact with a young man, take him to dinner, and see where God is calling him at that particular moment, to help me and to help Bishop decide, is it time for this young man to go? Should we encourage him at all, or should we let some of the other things that need to happen in his life happen before we're bringing him into the fold of our seminarians?
Pastors, the key.
How about families?
Families, very important. Families that are encouraging vocations and praying for vocations in the family unit then lays the groundwork, and the priest, the pastor of the parish, is the one who kind of seals the deal by inviting a young man to consider a vocation.
The best network that a vocation director can have is his brother priests. Our average age of the priest in our diocese is now 47 years old. We have a lot of very active pastors in our diocese, and I know this because of the database that we have generated. It's like a weather map almost for me, and my map lights up where a young or even a very holy priest is working with young men, because all of a sudden names start to appear, almost as if out of nowhere, and sometimes even overnight. And so there isn't a formal organization established. It's the Holy Spirit working through a priest to promote vocations. Now, whenever I see that as a director of vocations, it's like cherry picking, you know, and if I can spend one day in one part of the diocese, and the result will be that I get 2 or 3 young men interested in the priesthood, it's much easier than trying to go out and do the work myself. Our model in the Diocese of Wichita isn't to have a dynamic priest as vocation director that's a Pied Piper. It is to have every priest that we can in the trenches, promoting vocations to the priesthood, to build up a culture among our lay people, being open to God's will for their children, to educate and form our young children so that they're open to God's will in their life. Our Catholic school system is filled with 95 or 97% Catholic school kids because of our program of stewardship in the diocese. And we test our Catholic school kids each year on their faith, just like the state tests them on their math skills. We test them in what they're learning, and our kids receive a great formation not only in grade school but in high school. And when you build up that culture, in a diocese, it bears fruit. I've seen it firsthand.
Well, first of all, it's primarily spiritual. You have to get the priests energized, and you need to get some speaker in who can, like a clergy day or something like that, to try to energize the clergy about promoting vocations to the priesthood. And I know it's not politically correct to say this sometimes, but we're promoting vocations to the priesthood. This is what we're needing. You also have to promote vocations to good married life, to the religious life, to all that, but that's not what this is talking about. You can't have a generic thing in which everybody who has any call, whatever, can go and think about it. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. You've got to say, you may not be called to the priesthood, but we want you to consider this particular vocation. So it has to be specific to it, and you have to be happy about promoting it and why it's good for you to consider it. But it can be such a hard sell that it scares them. So really, it's the virtue of prudence. You can't teach prudence. You just have to kind of have it. And so you have to have the prudent people who are dealing with these kids to do it. So you need to get your priests energized.
So if a vocation director can effectively convey that message to pastors and help them to give them confidence how to identify men who Jesus has chosen, and two, how to appropriately and effectively lend their voice to Jesus, so that when they call the young man forth, there is a power, there is a compunction, there is a piercing, where the young man sits up and says, okay, Father really thinks this is a possibility. I want to consider this strongly. My father, my biological father, did that for me when I was in college. I first was an electrical engineer, studying to be electrical engineer. This is my senior year in college. I came back for like an Easter break or some time, I'm not sure, spring break, Easter break. I think that's the break it was. And after going to church one morning, Sunday morning, where our farm was 9 miles from our church. So me and Dad are driving home. Dad and I are driving home, making small talk about the crops and the weather and the neighbors and the pastures and stuff. And when we got about 1.5 miles from home, my father simply turned to me and said, son, the qualities I admire in a priest I see in you. And I want you to know I would be honored if Jesus chose one of my sons to be a priest. He lent his voice in an effective way just by my dad saying son. Whenever he said that, I knew what he was about to say was very important to him. And if pastors can learn how to do that, if they can learn how to identify, what happened in me when I was being called to be a priest, I think is happening in that young man. And I need to now take time, have him over for dinner, have him over for lunch, have him over to my office, and say, son. And then his heart opens, and the Jesus can have his way with him. But too often, we priests are too lighthearted we sit in the sacristy and say, hey, buddy, you would look good in a collar, without effectively calling them, because we're a bit insecure ourselves.
Nothing substitutes for a parish priest being seen by his people as happy, joyful, and striving to be holy. That, more than anything else, will get the kids to begin to think about it.
A parish vocation committee exists to try to initiate parish vocation activities, on a parish basis. So to assist the pastor in a way to have parish vocation activities going. So they have this angel tree, an Advent tree, and the chalice program where they pass a a chalice on from family to family, and the families take it into their home and pray for vocations. And there's the 31 Club where people sign up to go to Mass one day each month. So if they sign up on number 12, the 12th of every month, they go to daily Mass and they offer that Mass for vocations, and prayers for getting people praying for vocations, vocation prayer, so on and so forth.
We had a vocation group composed of parents, of seminarians and priests. We had a vocation group of men and women like yourself who were interested, saw the problem, were interested in promoting vocations to the priesthood. But with the lay groups, they always have to be willing to answer this question, because every kid eventually thinks it if doesn't ask it. Well, if the priesthood is so great, why aren't you one? You know, and you've got to have an answer for that, because if they don't ask it verbally, they ask it by their look. You know, you're sitting out there and they say, well, this is so great. You know, here you are with 5 kids and a business. Well, why?
I send out a mailing to each priest in our diocese, not just the pastors, but the hospital chaplains and every single priest in our diocese, to gather names. I also resubmit to them names that have been submitted from their assignment in the past, so it might be their parish or their high school, and also the information that I have with their new names that they've submitted. At the same time, I ask the priest to invite these young men personally, because they're the ones in the trenches, the pastors and the chaplains. They're the ones that are really tilling the ground, and that's where I get results. When a priest will take the time to personally invite a young man to the retreat. We do get a few extra from the phone calls that we make in the chancery, but when a priest has a relationship with a young man and extends a personal invitation, it means a lot.
They can't see you as a vocation priest. They have to see you as a happy priest who's trying to be holy and trying to get them to be holy. And they have to see that you are articulate in your presentation of the faith. I was their teacher as well. And so I would teach them about morality, and I would teach them about the faith. I took the 2 most problematic courses in those days, which was Catholic doctrine and morality. I taught 2 courses of morality. To the sophomores, I taught basic morality, and to the seniors, I taught advanced morality. And one parent asked me one time, he said, well, what's the difference between the 2? And I said, well, sophomore year, I tell them why they shouldn't do what they want to do. And senior year, I tell them why they should feel guilty about what they did do junior year. And you can't, you have to call them to a high standard. You have to encourage them, be infinitely patient with them, and you have to have a sense of humor. And God gave me a good sense of humor. And you have to be able to laugh with them about their mistakes, and you have to be able to correct with humor. And they respond to that. They don't respond to, you know, real, you know, yelling and serious words and things like this. You can have serious conversations, but only once they trust you. So they have to trust you. And after that, when you got to be around them, they would come to you with their problems. You would interact with them at their football games and their basketball games. Then you got to the point, well, now what are you going to be doing? You know, and you talk to them when they were juniors. What are you going to be doing? Where are you going to go next year? Oh, I don't know. I was thinking about going to this or this or this. Well, why don't you ask God? So you get them to ask God what it is. You get them to develop that prayer life. You get them to ask God so that he has a chance to present the priesthood to them without a miracle. And then you encourage them by saying, well, you know, you're thinking about this. Have you ever thought about the priesthood? You have some good qualities that might make you a good priest. You insert that into the conversation with God, and then they begin to think it. And they begin to ask God, and then God has to do his work.
I've simply had to learn that pastors are very busy, and so as a director of vocations, I want to be able to assist them, not put more work on their plate. And so whenever I can go out and assist them and take the masses for the weekend because they're going to be away, I'll do that for them. And I'm free to do that because I'm in this full-time position. And when I have the weekend masses, well, there's the pulpit for addressing the whole parish on what it means to support vocations, always with the gospel of that day in mind, of course. And so I'm able to assist pastors with some of that supply work, and I know they appreciate that. And so I do that with the pastors, and I really try to be available to their staff, their DREs, their religious education directors, and come to their high schools and be available that way so that I'm able to take a load off from them. But I really see them as the front line of interaction day to day with those vocation candidates, those candidates for priesthood and consecrated life. So I really value my conversations with them. And that was the best advice I got from a past vocation director. Get to know the pastors.
You can keep asking the questions to raise the priority. And you have to keep it as a priority in the clergy's mind. You have to keep, in a sense, pestering the pastors. What can our parish do to help vocations? We promoted a vocation club in each parish. And if they didn't have any kids in the parish, and some of them didn't at that time, well, they could at least do something to pray for vocations. You have to ask God for vocations. And as Mother Teresa said, a diocese gets the vocations it deserves. Which is a judgment, a terrible judgment if you're not doing much. But there was great wisdom there. There was great wisdom there. After the sting of the insult passes, you say, well, she's right. If we hustle, we'll probably get vocations. If we pray, we'll probably get vocations. But we haven't been hustling and we haven't been praying maybe the way we should.
In this archdiocese, we have the gift of Catholic education with 18 Catholic high schools and 58 Catholic grade schools. And so appearances in those Catholic educational institutions as a vocation director, it's really easy then to gather young people and teach them, especially at the ages of 6th grade and 11th grade. 11 they would call it, when a person's 11 years old and when a person's in the 11th grade. Those two times are strategically seen as times in which young people are really considering what they want to do with their lives. And so I try to reach out to them with special programs, special visits to the schools at those ages. In fact, we just had a 6th grade vocation awareness day, and we had 1,100 6th graders from all of our urban Catholic schools gather in one high school, and we had a beautiful day of recollection and prayer with the Archbishop, and certainly a pep rally, if you will, for a time being, but very much focused on what it means to see the priesthood and see the consecrated life lived with vigor and joy. And so we had them standing before them and providing them with that. So.
Now, just simple promotion events that the Office of Vocation does here. We do something for grade schoolers every year, for high schoolers every year, and college students every year. Okay? The first thing we do is what we call the Vocation Day for 5th graders. And I put the materials in this packet. Vocation Day for 5th graders. I just put some basic materials in this. But here's what it is. We invite every 5th grader from every Catholic school in our diocese, obviously through the principals and through the pastors, to come to the cathedral. They bus them all in. Every 5th grader in our diocese comes to the cathedral for an entire day of vocation events. Okay? The bishop's there, nuns are there, monks are there, priests are there, youth ministers are there, and we have a full day of vocation activities. We begin at 9:30 and they're done by 2:30 or 3. We have Mass with them. We have McDonald's meal with them. We serve them, but then we have 3 little workshops we do with them. One workshop, so we divide them into 3 groups. There's about 200 kids. Divide them into groups of 70. And then they rotate through these 3 workshops. One workshop is they go up into the cathedral, and our bishop is kneeling in between all of them, in the middle of all of them. They each get a brand new rosary. White ones for the girls, black ones from the boys. We get them from the Knights of Columbus, these beautiful little rosaries. And then the bishop speaks to all of these kids and then says, kids, we're going to pray a rosary for any of you here who have been chosen by Jesus to be a priest or a sister or a monk, and we're going to pray the rosary right now for you. And then they show them how to pray the rosary in it all. And then the bishop blesses them and talks to them. It's very special for the kids. The second thing we do is we have a monk and a priest speak to the boys about the priesthood and religious life. And then we have sisters who speak to the girls about the women's religious life. And then the third workshop is they're all in the gym. Youth ministers are keeping them from breaking things. And then in the meantime, the boys come up and have a picture with me and with the abbot from the monastery. And then we develop these pictures, put them in a jacket. We all sign the jacket, and we send them to the kids so they have them on their nightstand and they see themselves with a priest and a monk to start imagining themselves that way. And then we end, our bishop's a magician, a licensed magician, so then we end with a magic show, and they go home all excited.
Yeah, the age groups that I start working with are high school age, and we call that RAD, Radical Awareness of Discipleship. And it's a radical step for these young men to consider a vocation. So the high school agers, we have retreats. We had one a few weekends ago. And again, to see how successful a pastor is in inviting, fully half the young men, 11 of the young men at this retreat were from one parish. And the others from various parishes across the diocese. So we have those retreats, 2 in the fall, 2 in the spring, and then we have summer events. And different, I take them to baseball games, take them to different events. But generally we have 2 retreats in the fall for that, 2 retreats in the spring. For the older guys that are college age or older, we again have 2 retreats in the fall. I generally have 1 retreat during the Advent season, an Advent retreat, and then 2 retreats in the spring, again with other events here and there, camping trips in the summer, that sort of thing.
Every Catholic male junior in the Diocese of Bismarck who is registered in a parish, every single one of them, when they're juniors, they get this packet from me and their pastor. And what it is we send a letter to every pastor asking him to send to us the name and address of every junior male in his parish and to have it on address labels. So they send that to my secretary. Then I send a sample letter. To the pastor so he doesn't have to write it. And he puts it on his letterhead, and he signs it with his name, personally addressed to every young man. So even though I send these out from the Office of Vocations, it's coming from their pastor. And so it's a personal letter from their pastor. And what he sends to them is an interactive CD-ROM, which we developed here back in, and it has one of these cool cases that shoots it out. That's maybe enough just to get the kids to look at it. So an interactive CD-ROM with a bunch of sub-menus, and it's very well done. And a bunch of different, so it involves the priests of the diocese, the bishop's story. Our governor is a fine Catholic man. One of the main anchor women in Bismarck is a Catholic woman. our mayor is a Catholic man, so we interviewed all of them, what priests, the difference priests have made to them, so on. We have Pope John Paul II's vocation story here, so on and so forth. And then we also send to them this discernment booklet. So we send these two with this letter from the pastor to the home of every junior Catholic male in the diocese. So in the privacy of their own home, they don't have to be in front of girls. They can maybe get excited about the thought of being a priest. The office of vocations rises and falls on the shoulders of our Catholic schools, Catholic high schools. And the vocations in our Catholic high schools rise and fall on whether or not the bishop is willing to invest an effective young priest, teacher, chaplain in that high school. It doesn't happen otherwise for us. You'll get a couple, but nothing like what happens when you have an effective priest, teacher, chaplain. So how does that happen? It obviously comes from the bishop. The bishop would be the one who would make that decision. He would see it as a priority. And there would be resistance to him saying these young priests need to be in our parishes. We have 100 parishes and only 40 priests, and now you're using 3 of them in our Catholic high schools. In this priest shortage, why are we investing priests here and using up priests in our Catholic high schools when they could be out in parishes? And my response to that always is, we can't afford not to. Because if we don't invest these 3 priests in our 3 high schools, next year we're going to have 3 fewer priests. And the year after that, 3 fewer priests. And the year after that, 3 fewer priests. And at some point, if we don't turn this ship around, we're just going to continue to have fewer and fewer priests. And so this is an investment so that we have more priests and more priests and more priests. And at this point in the Diocese of Bismarck, we have hit bottom a couple years ago, and now the numbers are only going to increase for the next 15, perhaps 15 years. So I work very closely with these 3 chaplains. They're my most important men. These 3 chaplains are the most important men for my office of vocation, for the office of vocations. And so I provide them the resources they need. And what I beg of them every year is they handpick up to 10 men, 15 men that they think could have been chosen by Jesus to be priests. I pay for the entire trip. They rent vans or a bus or whatever vehicles, and I arrange a weekend visit at a seminary, St. John Vianney Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. And so these 3 priests take a group. This year, I think they're going to have 20 guys. They take them down. I think they leave on a Thursday. They have Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, and they come back on a Sunday. They actually live at the seminary. This seminary has 160 guys in it. And so it's a very high energy sort of experience. Some real high quality guys. I'm friends with the rector, and he's very good to them. And so these young men get an inside look with their priest chaplains there to process it all with them of what it's like to be a seminarian. And all kinds of stereotypes are then shattered. And we get several guys applying just from that experience each year. These kids are learning how to pray. They're truly learning how to pray. So they would have Eucharistic adoration every lunch. There would be 2 or 3 seniors adoring Jesus every lunch. They would have 3 or 4 penance services a year where the entire school goes to confession. And throughout that day, Jesus is exposed in the Eucharist, and they're all adoring Jesus as they're going to confession. They would have Mass regularly as a school. They have this thing called The Rock. I think once a month, once every 2 months, where on like a Wednesday evening at 7 p.m., they set up the gym with effective lighting. They have a teenage-led Christian rock sort of band. And then they bring in some speaker with the kids. So it's and then it ends with pizza and like dodgeball or something. I'm not into that stuff, but some priests are good at this. I'm not, and I've justified that by saying that's not my job. but what happens is they show up. They have praise and worship music. The director of the Rock addresses them, has an opening prayer, introduces the presenter, often a high-charging presenter of some sort. He speaks or she speaks for 30 minutes, 20 minutes. And then they bring in Jesus with the Eucharist, place him on the altar. All the kids adore for 20 minutes. We have benediction. End with another song, a blessing, all done in an hour. They have their pizza and a game of some sort. The Diocese of Bismarck, we have no Newman Centers.
No Newman.
None. It's a real deficiency for us. That's why our Catholic high schools are so important to us. We have University of Mary that has a campus ministry out there, and we're hoping for good things here in the future. But we haven't had too many men apply from that program there either. But what we do have in the eastern part of the state is NDSU and UND, the two big universities in North Dakota, where most of our graduates go, where most of our Catholic kids go for a university is UND and NDSU. So I work with the chaplains, the priests of the Newman Centers there. So St. Paul's Newman Center at NDSU and St. Thomas Aquinas Newman Center at UND. And they graciously and generously send to me the roster of all the names of young men from the western half of North Dakota who are registered as members of these Newman Centers. So they get me their names, their school addresses, and then I hunt them down. And I send to them, this is the letter that I send to the chaplain. This is the letter I send to the young man. And then we send a very simple questionnaire with a self-addressed stamped envelope. And it's this basic. Have you ever thought about being a priest? If so, do you still think about it? Have you ever thought about being a monk? If so, do you still think about it? How often do you go to Mass? How are you involved in your parish? Are you a reader, Eucharistic minister, altar server, CCD teacher, etc., etc.? And then they send that back to me. I send this with them also. This was developed largely for college students. And those who send it back with any sort of affirmative response, sort of, kind of, I do every once in a while, maybe, or in some cases, yes, I do a lot, I then make personal contact with them. They send me, I have their contact information when they fill this out, their phone number, their address. And then I make a personal contact and I will drive down and visit them.
But the other one that's been very effective and had some high impact is the Steubenville conferences that occur throughout the United States. I believe every year they have about 20 or 22 of them in a variety of sites. They'll be in Denver, they'll be in Minneapolis, they'll be in Springfield, Missouri. And when they have those conferences, they gather usually 2,000 or more youth in one place for 3 days. And they teach them really the three things that are essential for discerning a vocation. They teach them how to pray. They teach them how to grow in virtue, the virtues of especially manhood and womanhood. And they have separate sessions for each of them. And so once someone starts praying and starts desiring to grow in virtue, you know they're going to need the sacraments.
Yes.
And so they bring them back to the sacraments. And beautiful confessions are occurring for hours on end at those conferences with priests. As a priest, I'll go there, and that's all I'll do is hear confessions with 20 or 30 other brother priests. So we'll hear hundreds of confessions at a time during the course of a day. Good confessions. We've never hosted one here in Omaha, so we're always farming out our kids to these other sites, which is okay, but it makes for an adventure, and you all get on buses, and it's an expense. But at the end of the conference, they ask those who have been considering a call to come forward. There's an altar call, if you will. And out of a 2,000 body of kids, 2,000 students, you'll see 200 young men come and stand up. You'll see 200 young women come and stand up, and they're applauded and they're encouraged. And so you get to see the faces from the crowd that have this on their heart. And we'll follow up with a retreat for those young men and those young women who've stepped forward during the Steubenville conference as a way of keeping them plugged in, keeping them thinking and praying in that regard. So it allows us to identify those who are considering the vocation. So
we have two programs in our diocese. Neither is run by my office. However, we help to coordinate and we help to promote the events. And the first is a 6th grade Vocations Fair. We have 3 of them. We have 2 in the rural parts of our diocese, one in Hutchinson and one in southeast Kansas, normally in Parsons. And we have another one that is citywide. Our PSR families are invited, but it is during school hours. But our 6th graders in Catholic school are excused for the day, and they come to a local church, and the Sarah Club puts on an event where we bring in religious sisters and other priests from throughout the diocese to promote vocations to the priesthood and the religious life. Another very active and long-running program is Totus Tuus, which is actually a whole department within our diocese. It's a summer catechetical program that is like a vacation Bible school in a parish. In addition to that vacation Bible school program, there is a summer camp that's run in a rural part of our diocese. These two camps coincide, and one feeds the other. On the parish level, college-age students and seminarians go out from week to week, and they go from parish to parish throughout our diocese, evangelizing probably well over 1,000 young people in our diocese each summer. We have 6 teams currently that go for 7 or 8 weeks each summer to different parishes, and they teach our children the catechism, they teach them the Bible. The children have an opportunity for confession, for adoration, and for daily Mass. And a key element of that program is promotion of vocations to the priesthood. In addition, the camp has a more concentrated effort to promote vocations to the priesthood as well, and the camp is, as well as the camp is for 5th graders through seniors in high school on varying weeks. The parish program concentrates on K through 8, but there's a high school program in the evenings as well. As I said, it's not something that's a part of our program per se under my office in the Office of Vocations, but at the same time I'm in constant contact with the director of Totus Tuus so that I can integrate seminarians into teaching and also innovate ideas in terms of how we can promote vocations to the priesthood through that program. I have a personal page on Facebook, and within Facebook my friends are organized under two categories. One would be a general category for every event that we have. Another would be a specific category of where the young man is, whether he's in a high school or in a college, and what specific college he's at. So I use it to promote my seminary trips and my annual Quo Vadis retreat. But in addition, when I'm going up to K-State or KU or Benedictine, or when I'm going to preach Mass at Wichita State University, I send out messages to those young men that are in those areas when I go out for a formal visit. I was at Kansas State University this past fall, and I think I walked with, I don't know how many young men, but it was 8 hours straight, one-on-one on that campus, because we have so many young men up there. I took a few more out for pizza that evening, and I went to bed plenty tired that night. But Facebook is the only way that I've been able to very efficiently contact directly these young people. We just started a new website. I'm not convinced that, even though our website probably ranks in the top 5 of the number of hits on our diocesan website, I'm not convinced that it is the best media to use for recruiting vocations to the priesthood. I think that one-to-one contact with a priest is far more effective. I think that creating this database helps us to target particular young men. I think that Facebook is a great conduit for invitation. But a website, the one thing that it does allow a young man to do is to remain anonymous and to explore the possibility, or see what seminaries we send to, what priesthood is like in the Diocese of Wichita. But in my list of priorities, it's pretty low. We do have a seminarian poster that we publish every year, and in addition to that, this year we created a bookmark with the same theme that's on our poster, and on the back side we have the names of all of our seminarians, so that our lay people can put them in their Bibles or their prayer books or their breviaries, so that all of our priests have them, and they can pray for our seminarians by name each day. We printed over 10,000 of these, and I just have a handful left in my office right now. They've been very popular. I get calls all the time about them. We have 3 Sarah clubs that are very active in our diocese, and so things like this bookmark are a great way to do promotions in our diocese, but we have great conduits in order not only to distribute them, but to get people excited about praying for our seminarians.
Second thing I always would encourage is in every vocation program, I used to say to my bishop, Bishop, one of our goals in the Vocation Office this year is that no one man will not go to the seminary this year because he was not invited. If he doesn't go, it'll be for some other reason. Yeah. In other words, we have to get the word out and a personal invitation to these young men. I want you to think about becoming a priest. It's a wonderful life. It's a happy life. Jesus is calling some men to this life. And to do that requires, I think the issue is that most vocation directors, quite frankly, are wearing 5 or 6 caps. They have all these different jobs. And, trying to get a database of every young man in the whole diocese between the ages of, 17 and 30, and trying to send a letter and an email, it's a pretty intimidating job. And then, as you know, in marketing, you have to send an email, you have to follow with a phone call, you send a letter, you visit the classrooms and invite them there. And we have to constantly be getting the word out that this is a great life, and Jesus, I want to invite you to consider it. And so that's an important part. A lot of different ways to do that. And I think all vocation directors do it in some ways, but none of us do it in enough ways. Because real marketing, successful marketing, and we're talking about the 0.1%, which is our part now, we have to get the word out in a number of different ways. And I think most vocation directors simply don't have enough time. They're just overwhelmed, and that's what makes it difficult for them.
Yeah, we have a group, Ask by Name is at some parishes, and then the Andrew Dinners are at other parishes.
Well, you do have Andrew Dinner.
Yes, and those are pretty successful. If more pastors did it, I think we would have more success, because it forces the pastor to then look and see which guys might have a vocation and invite them to an event.
People have a great love for the priesthood, and as a result, they have a great love for our seminarians. So whenever our seminarians go out on a team in totus tuus in a parish, there is great excitement by the people. And so not only do the seminarians have a direct impact on the people of their own generation, but they do on every generation in our diocese. Imagine a second grader who sees a 21-year-old healthy and young seminarian who loves Jesus Christ and who wants to promote the faith and who wants to foster a faith life in others. Yeah, it's very exciting for that second grader, but it's also exciting for the volunteers who are there watching the seminarian and watching these young people do what they're doing all out of love for Jesus. These young people only make about $150 a week, and they're working from 8 o'clock in the morning until well after 10 o'clock at night, with a break for dinner and maybe a break for an hour in the afternoon. There's only one thing that will get them to do that for that little money, and that is love for Jesus Christ and love for their faith. And when people see that love, there's nothing like it. So certainly there's a great fervor created, not only by totus tuus and by our young seminarians.
Anything I do, I want to utilize the seminarians, because I might be their director as a vocation director, but they're eager to see young people step forward. Yeah. And they're eager to spread the message of what they're learning in the seminaries. And so there's a great vigor and joy that they offer to any event. If I go to a high school and I talk to the high school students, they'll listen to me, but if I bring a seminarian, well, they're captivated. And they're all ears, because here's a peer in this place called the seminary, and they can't help but listen. And it's really a joy to see the seminarians unfold and share their lives. And so I bring them out of school sometimes to be at events like the Vocation Awareness Day, and if I go to a high school, I'll make sure that I'm able to take a seminarian. In fact, tomorrow I'm going to visit a high school, and the seminarians are available on their spring break, and some of them have said, "I'll be with you, Father."
You have a seminary in the diocese.
Also, one of the things I've tried to do as director of vocations is each year we have a Christmas collection to help fund our education of seminarians fund, priest retirement and education fund. It's called the Christmas Call to Sharing. I try to send a seminarian out into our parishes just to thank the people on that weekend, because our people pay for the education, room, board, and tuition of all of our seminarians, from our freshmen in college all the way through our fourth theologians who are about ready to be ordained priests. We fund that education without ever asking for a debt obligation or any type of commitment from the young man, except for one thing. Bishop Jacobs always asks them not to be the best, but to do their best. And if they do that, we're confident that those who are called by God will continue and will persevere, and God willing, one day will be great priests. But it's because of the commitment of our lay people in our diocese who generate a collection of well over $600,000 each year to pay for a portion of the education of these young men, that is also a sign of encouragement. And so our seminarians go out the weekend before Christmas just to say thanks to those people, to see them, to meet them, and to greet them, but also to increase an awareness of vocations in our diocese. Not just that the people are, through their generosity and stewardship, helping to pay for their formation, but also so that the people can see our seminarians and can see what fine young men we have and what the fine young men that God has called to the priesthood in our diocese.
Leaving seminary, of course, isn't necessarily a failure, right? Our job isn't to make priests, so to speak. Our job is to help a man do what God wants him to do. And if God doesn't want him to be a priest, then he shouldn't be. And so if a guy enters seminary and in that comes to clarity that he is meant to be married, etc., we consider that a success story. So I would like to think in just about every case, guys have left at least with clarity, knowing God's will for them and desire for them, and I feel that's a success when that happens. In that regard, to that end, something I would strongly promote to every vocation director is the Institute for Priestly Formation down at Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska. It's a fabulous, fabulous program. Institute for Priestly Formation. It's a 10-week summer program for seminarians, basically to help them encounter God in their heart, to come to encounter God and learn how to pray in a very deep, affective, personal level, where they come to know God, how God speaks to them in their thoughts, feelings, and desires, in their affections. And so how to say yes to it. And it's been very effective for the men coming to clarity about God's will for them. It's a 10-week program. I would strongly recommend it. It's about $7,000 a guy. But as I've told our bishop, and once again, our dear bishop supports it, provides all the money and resources for it, that we can't afford not to do it. That seminary formation for us costs the diocese per man in major seminary about $40,000 a year. $40,000 a year per man. And if you have a guy in a seminary who doesn't know what God wants, and he hangs around for 2 years simply because he's confused, if you can get just one guy to discern clearly 1 year early, 40 divided by 7 is 5.5. You have saved $40,000. That's 5 tuitions for this summer program. So we have found it very beneficial and financially reasonable.
Each summer our seminarians engage in an extensive formation program away from, while they're away from seminary. So they work. They're out in the fields, many times in wheat harvest, or they're mowing lawns. One of them worked for a plumbing company last year, and one of them did electrical work. But we bring them together to a central location every Friday during the summer for an evening of prayer, fellowship, and formation. Last year we put together a diocesan handbook for the seminarians, because each seminary they go to has a program of formation. At the same time, a local diocese needs to form them to be a priest of that diocese. So we're not doing something that's antithetical to what's going on in the seminary, but we're trying to do something that will help to incorporate and integrate them as a priest here once they're ordained. So the seminarians and I came together last summer for the summer of formation, and we had what was called Seminarian Summer Camp. And we put together this diocesan handbook so that they would know certain things that they need to know or need to be formed into as a priest of our diocese. We did it around the 4 main promises that they'll take at ordination: celibacy, obedience, prayer, and simplicity of life. And for 2 weeks each during the summer, we looked at one of those promises and came up with principles and practical guidelines that would help to form them as a priest in our diocese one day. So, but I think that this summer program that we do, which also includes now a 3-day retreat each summer, is one of the best things that we do in our diocese, because it keeps our seminarians in contact with one another. So if they're having doubts at some point during their summer, it's not just up to the vocation director to get in his car and go out and meet them one-on-one. They're an encouragement for one another. They look forward, I think, to these evenings of formation, at least. They look forward to getting together and seeing one another, and it helps in terms of our own retention in the diocese with our seminarians.
I have 2 seminarians that help out in my office. They're assigned to my office, 2 guys each year, and they're part of organizing and putting on each of the retreats. And they'll give a talk, a reflection. I'll have seminarians help prepare the food and interact with the guys at lunchtime during the prayer times. And then I'll even use the seminarians to give a talk or 2 at the retreat. And it proves fruitful, because it's precisely these guys, these seminarians, who they're looking up to and seeing as perhaps a model for their own lives.
And one of the things that I was able to do last year was to launch a series of videos on the website which featured 2 of our seminarians, one in college and one in theology. And the collegian gave a day-by-day tour of the seminary, a video tour, broken down into segments, so it's not a... Usually folks only have the attention span of 30 seconds, 2 minutes max. So if they see a video that's 2 minutes long, they'll look at it. And so we've got a video for the college seminary, and it's broken down into pieces. What's the day like? What do you do during your evenings? You know, so they just follow the seminarian through the seminary. And then the theologian is more reflective, and he's more insightful as to the interior life and what it is to commit one's life. And so he talks about those final stages of seminary. So the 2 seminarians are on a video, and then 3 priests and the archbishop answer about 6 to 10 questions about the priesthood. What brought them to consider the priesthood? What seminary do they go to? What do they love about the priesthood? What's difficult about the priesthood? So each of these questions is answered by these priests. And so these video segments have been very helpful for young people to just, as they surf the net, to see these videos. They're more effective than pictures.
Another very successful thing is, in a vocation program, we have to talk about the remote preparation and the proximate preparation. And the Holy Father speaks of this in Familias Consortia when he talks about the human family and marriage. There's the remote preparation for marriage, which is done in the family unit, isn't it? Watching their own mother and father live marriage, and in their catechism classes, learning about the sacrament of marriage. Well, the same is true of priesthood. I mean, we have to visit the first graders and the second graders, and we have to teach them about vocations, and we have to invite them. But obviously, it'll be a very long time before those guys are ready to go to seminary. But that work has to be done. But then there's the very proximate preparation, which is done with the men who are of age that they could go to the seminary if all things were, if they're ready and if they feel called and they've done a proper discernment. So you have to have both aspects, and I think a lot of vocation directors that are very successful, they have their seminarians who are very excited and they're energetic and enthusiastic, and they send them to visit the schools in the summertime and over Christmas break. And that's, I think, very, very effective.
Yes, we have our seminarians, and with 72 of them around the diocese, helping in parishes, working at the schools, these kids get to see a witness of young men who are excited, who are holy, and they really become the role models for these young men to consider a vocation.
There was a gathering among the North American bishops and vocation directors at one point, and they just identified these 5 steps that I think are just very helpful for me to keep in mind as I go through the labor. And those 5 steps include the number 1 step is to prayer and be encouraging prayer. And when we encourage prayer, that means you're going to be evangelizing people. And when you evangelize, you have to then educate. That's the 3rd step. And when you start educating folks, you begin to mentor the young people in very particular ways. And finally, after mentoring, you can begin to invite. And so those 5 steps were identified as the way of bringing out of the culture of vocations and maintaining the culture of vocations and promoting the culture of vocations. Those 5 steps really just kind of allow me to see the strategy behind all this work we're doing. Yeah. And for me, the hardest work is the promotion. You can never do enough promotion and raising awareness. That's an endless task. The most delightful work is walking with a young man and helping him discern.
We're a diocese of about 40 active diocesan priests. 40 active diocesan priests. This fall, we had 23 seminarians. And another one has been signed up and accepted. So 24, let's say, which is 60% as many seminarians as we have priests. So God has been incredibly generous to us, all homegrown men, all from this diocese, not brought in from outside. So really good things happening here in the Diocese of Bismarck in that regard.
How large is your diocese?
Our diocese is about 62,000 Catholics, about, I think, 25,000 families. It's the western half of North Dakota, basically the western half of the state. So about 175 miles wide, 250 miles from north to south. So that's the situation we're in with the diocese. Out of those 24 seminarians, 2 out of 3 are graduates from our 3 Catholic high schools. 2 out of 3 are graduates from our 3 Catholic high schools. And between those 3 Catholic high schools, which are co-ed, we only graduate about 175 kids a year. So one school's about 85 kids in a grade. The other 2 are right around 45 kids a grade. So between the 3, there's 175 graduates. So the big picture of the diocese as far as what God is using and doing and what I would recommend to a vocation director. The first thing I would recommend to a vocation director is to understand that he is not the recruiter. He is not the recruiter. He is not the promoter. God has not given him that grace. The ones who are supposed to call forth men to the priesthood, the ones to who are supposed to lend Jesus their voice to call forth men, are those who have been given the pastoral care of that group of people. So, pastors in parishes are the ones who have the power to identify Jesus calling this young man. They lend their voice to Christ, and he calls them through them, not through the vocation director. The chaplain of our Catholic high schools, the priest chaplains, the priest teachers, are the ones through whom Jesus calls these young men in high school. They identify, they lend their voice. Jesus calls them through them. For too long, Denny, we have gotten this idea in our minds, both as lay people, as presbyterates, that the vocation director is the man who recruits men to the priesthood. And that's wrong. Jesus calls men to the priesthood through the priest who has the pastoral care of that person's soul. He's the one with power. He's the one with influence. He's the one with this effectiveness with that person. I've been vocation director for 8 years now. In our application form, we have a line that says, who most influenced you in wanting to enter the seminary? In 8 years, I've had one man put my name down. And in those 8 years, we've accepted about 48 guys. Before I was vocation director, when I was teaching in Catholic high school, when I was a pastor, several guys put my name down. And that's how it's supposed to be. But we have this idea that it's the vocation director's job. The vocation director's job is to assist those men that have been called by Jesus through the person who has the pastoral care of their soul, they come, and now the vocation director helps them discern and helps form them once they apply and are accepted. Are you seeing what I'm trying to say?
I have one of Pastor Dunlap accented hard.
So because here's what's happened. It would be like a pastor when they think of who's responsible for teaching CCD in my parish. If they thought of the director who had the office in the diocese, that person is the one responsible for teaching my kids. No, the pastor is responsible. The director of catechesis in the diocese assists the pastor to help the pastor do his job. And that's what the vocation director does. Father David Richter is to help the pastors do their job in regards to calling men forth. Okay? Because I have found as vocation director, they don't believe me. And the reason they don't believe me is they think I'm just saying this because it's supposedly my job. So when I tell a young man, have you ever thought about being a priest? You'd make a good priest. He's thinking in his mind, Father Richter's the vocation director. He tells that to everyone. It's like whether you're going to believe a salesman about insurance policy or about a neighbor who has that insurance, who says this is a good insurance. And that's the effectiveness with the person who's been given the pastoral care of the person's soul, as opposed to the vocation director.
Our model in the Diocese of Wichita isn't to have a dynamic priest as vocation director that's a Pied Piper. It is to have every priest that we can in the trenches, promoting vocations to the priesthood, to build up a culture among our lay people, being open to God's will for their children, to educate and form our young children so that they're open to God's will in their life. Our Catholic school system is filled with 95 or 97% Catholic school kids because of our program of stewardship in the diocese. And we test our Catholic school kids each year on their faith, just like the state tests them on their math skills. We test them in what they're learning, and our kids receive a great formation not only in grade school but in high school. And when you build up that culture in a diocese, it bears fruit. I've seen it firsthand.
So a vocation director is to help the pastors have confidence in their ability to identify, to trust their gut, and then to effectively learn how to have the young man in some sort of environment where they can effectively Jesus can effectively speak to their heart through the priest. That's my first thing.
One question, do you have any trouble getting the pastors on board?
Absolutely. For the most part, our diocese is pretty good. I'm very impressed with it. We have a fabulous presbyterate. The priests of the Diocese of Bismarck are excellent. Now, obviously, some are more cooperative than others. Some have this as a higher priority than others. And so my advice to a vocation director is don't waste your time. Don't waste your time with pastors who don't have this as a priority or resist this or for whatever reason aren't happy with their own priesthood. Don't waste your time on them. Devote your time to the pastors who love the priesthood, who are on fire. And there are some who have particular gifts in this regard. In my diocese, we have three priests, who have a gift this way. Actually, four. And so a vocation director shouldn't take it personally with the guys who are on our board. They shouldn't waste their time. Certainly no bad will toward the priest, but let him be and work with those that are going to work with you. Second, so the presbyterate. The second job, the second important thing, and perhaps the most important thing for the Diocese of Bismarck. Now this is all about the bishop, of course. And it depends on what kind of system and structure you have in your diocese. But for the Diocese of Bismarck, the single most important factor in this whole work is that our Catholic high schools are converted. They're converted. And there's this beautiful environment of Catholic faith and Catholic identity in the schools. There's a Catholic culture in the school. And God bless our dear Bishop Zipfel. He has generously devoted all kinds of resources to these schools. Primarily, he basically appoints a priest full-time, basically full-time. 75%. They live at a parish and they're parochial vicars. But they teach, so like junior or senior religion. So they teach a full year of religion to all the kids of one grade, in some cases two. And they're also the chaplain of the school. And there's no better way to promote the Catholic priesthood than that. To have a young, effective, happy young priest teaching these Catholic high schoolers. And so these young men sit in this classroom 5 days a week, and they get to know this priest in a much different way than they do from the pulpit on Sunday. And they say, wow, he's a lot like me. And he's a man, and he's happy. And that's really what's happening here.
I feel pretty comfortable that our priests in our diocese are working directly with our candidates. So they don't get nearly as much attention from me as the places where I have a concentration of young men outside of our diocese. I think it's important that I make a connection with these young men because a lot of them will find their vocation while they're in college. And if I can make that connection with them, there is a greater chance, I believe, that they'll come back and be a seminarian for us. And whenever it's kind of our stance in the Diocese of Wichita, when a young man comes from one of our colleges, if he lived outside of the diocese, grew up outside of the diocese, and his parents are still outside of the diocese, that we ask him to go and make an application to his home diocese first before he would ever even consider us, even if his vocation was inspired here. Now, once he's done that, it's a different question, but that's why I think that it's important that I keep a connection with the men outside of the diocese that are in college. And then, like I said, I take a different stance on where we have our own priests, because they normally feed directly into my office.
Have you noticed
That the application process, the discerning and the screening, who is the Lord really choosing here? And then once they get in, to assist them with their formation, working closely with the seminaries, which, by the way, is another very, very, very important thing that I would tell any vocation director. He needs to visit every seminary where he has men every year. It is one of the most important things he does every year is to visit these seminaries, make an on-site visit, and visit his men at these seminaries and get to meet the kind of friends these guys have. And to sit down with the rector and the vice rector and the formation advisor of each of his men every year. Every year. That's how you get to know these men. Because in the end, the bishop is going to ordain this man. And this vocation, and he's only going to ordain this man if the vocation director says, I think he should be ordained. And this vocation director is going to stand up on the ordination day of this man, and the bishop is going to ask him in front of the God and the people of God, do you judge this man to be worthy? And this vocation director, in good conscience, needs to be able to say, I do judge him to be worthy, and he can only say that if he in good conscience knows the man. And if he's not going and visiting these seminaries, all he knows about the man is the application process and their little summer gathering and their little Christmas party. And certainly the evaluations from the seminaries. But to see the man and interact with the man in his environment in the seminary is a huge thing. So I think that is very important. And for the college guys who can, have more things to work out and can get in more trouble, I try to go visit twice a year. Twice a year I have found is good to visit the college men.
I think that as the director of vocations, I soon found out that my job was broken down into 4 main areas, which is promotions, a very general area in which we try to build a culture of vocations from one end of our diocese to another. Building a culture of vocations is a very broad term, but what it means in a very intimate level is that we are trying to help our families to form our family life so that moms and dads are open to allowing God's will to flourish in the domestic church with their sons and daughters. Be open not only to a vocation to the priesthood and to the religious life, but to cultivating holy and healthy vocations to marriage as well. The second part of my duties as the director of vocations in Wichita is recruiting, and that is one-to-one contact with young men, but not only one-to-one contact with the director of vocations, but hopefully with every priest in our diocese. Bishop Jacobs and I truly believe that the more contact that a young man can have with his parish priest, with his pastor, or with an associate, or with any priest in our diocese, the more that we will have healthy and holy young men who are willing to at least give seminary a try, to seriously discern their vocation to the priesthood. Another area that I'm responsible for in this diocese is the application process. As a young man calls me on the phone and says, "Father Mike, I'm willing and ready to give seminary a try next year." So they knock on my door and we begin a journey that takes anywhere between 3 months and a year to prepare them to enter, to teach them to pray, to help them to discern God's will in their life, and to see if they have what it takes to be a seminarian for us. And the final area that the final duty of mine in the Diocese of Wichita is formation of our seminarians, relating not only to the seminaries, but running a program of formation in our diocese, especially during the summertime when we have Friday evenings of formation where all of our seminarians gather each week in prayer to go out and visit them while they're working in their apostolates or summer jobs, and visiting with their families so that I can answer questions for their moms and dads about what's going on in seminary and how their son is being formed into a priest in the image of Jesus Christ.
So whatever a parish has that's strong, maybe they have the Catholic foresters, I will work with them. Maybe they have a great Knights of Columbus, I will work with them. Maybe they have a very strong men's group, I will work with them. I don't need to reinvent the wheel in the parish. I just need to know what parish has what going on and what is strong there. And so some parishes don't have a very strong Knights of Columbus, but they have a men's group. Some parishes don't have a vocations awareness committee, but they have 9 Sarans. So I'm not going to reinvent the wheels to make it happen in that way. I'm going to contact the people that are there, already invested, and go forward with them. So,
other than, pray every day for young men, look for those hidden moments when God wants to give you grace, because the work isn't easy. And I remember having a frustrating moment one day in the office, and there was just this young man that was a gift of God that just came and fell literally right into my lap that day. And I looked up after he left and I said, "You really are up there." Because God does smile down upon us, even though the work isn't easy, but it is inspiring. And I've also, I think I've learned, and even though I haven't done this for very long, that through patience and prayer, God's will be done, and that He is providing vocations for the church, that we have to go out and find Him, but it's not the work of one priest or one man. It's the work of a whole presbyterate, it's the work of a bishop, and it's the work of all of the lay people in a diocese. Working together, we will provide for the future of the church. It's a work that can't be done alone, and it can't be done without God.